Konnichiwa, and greetings from London. I'm going to be talking to you today about the Synergy program. This is the practice workshop, which was established back in 2014, following some preliminary work in Greece with our partners from the Laskaridis Foundation in Piraeus in Greece. And this program has been evaluated by the University of the Peloponnese. We've now been commissioned to deliver this program by the NHS in England, and I have an affiliation, to declare my affiliation to the University of Bath. And here is the wonderful team from the Laskaridis Foundation in Greece, and my late colleague, Dr. Michael Macready, who was such an influence. Dr. Macready worked with AT-Autism and Studio 3, such an influence on the program. Sadly, Michael died about 4 years ago now, and we all miss him very much indeed. I'm going to take the unusual step of starting off with some take-home points. The first being that stress causes emotional responses, and those emotional responses often result in bad decisions, and bad decisions themselves can result in stress. And so we need to switch from our emotional responding to our rational responding, the emotional brain to the rational brain. That will be a theme throughout. The other points, the take-home points, is to emphasize that the focus on the character, well-being, mindset and stress of the worker is important, and the narrative, so that we know what we can control and what we can't control, that we reflect, that we examine our impressions, and that we can plan, that we premeditate adversity coolly, that we remain calm when under stressful conditions. Further take-home points are that it's to remember that it's up to us, that if we change the way we think and we change the story, we change our behaviour, then we might change the outcome. JCAAR reminds us that the best way to make children good is to first make them happy. And so many of the children and young people that we see are not happy children. I'm going to consider two narratives now. Jamie, who was described as black, a 15-year-old young man who was tall and athletic, attended a residential special school in a town in southern England where there were very few black people. He was non-speaking with a diagnosis of autism, and he was referred for an opinion on his challenging behaviour. Jamie was described by the school as difficult and dangerous, unpredictable, who disrupted the class by trying to leave lessons and would attack staff if he was prevented from doing this, sometimes causing injuries to these staff. But when we visited Jamie at the school, we met a very different picture. We spoke to a different member of staff, Peter, who worked with Jamie in the non-educational setting, that is the residential part of the school. Peter described Jamie as a great lad, active, good sense of humour, enjoyed running on the beach, trampolining, where he was skillful and enthusiastic. Peter said that the staff who formed a connection with Jamie through his activities framed him quite differently. They enjoyed his company. They were not afraid of him. He was relaxed with people he liked. Peter told us that the sensory overload, problems and the boredom meant that classrooms were difficult for Jamie, and he terminated his being there in ways that he knew. He got up and he left. He was then restrained by staff who were trying to prevent him from leaving, causing him to become upset. Peter recognised these two narratives. So on the one hand, we had Jamie, who was described as difficult and dangerous, and on the other hand, staff regarded him as, with affection, as a great lad. So where do you intervene? Is it with Jamie, or is it with the staff? How was Jamie framed? What was the narrative? Just flagging up the content of this workshop. I'm going to do a brief introduction and the background and context of the programme, followed by some key points and themes, the theoretical base, practical application, a summary of the evaluation from the University of the Peloponnese, and some reflection and discussion. So the introduction then of the background and the context. I want to show you a short clip now of a mother who was trying to persuade her daughter to clean her teeth, and look for the emotions and how escalation occurs. What is the mental state of the mother? And is this a bad mother? And I want you to think about those. Now, here is the clip.
Come on.
No.
I'm not playing around, Brooke. You need to brush your teeth.
No.
Yes.
No.
Come on.
No, Mom. No.
You're gonna brush your teeth, and I'll help you.
No, Mom.
Yes.
No.
Come on.
No.
I'll help you.
No, Mom.
Stop. You're acting ridiculous.
No.
Come on.
No.
Do you want to go back to Missy and Tim's and not be able to stay here because you're not listening and doing as you're told? Come on.
No.
Please. Brooke, please come here.
No.
It's not okay to hit or spit. Hey, stop it. Brooke, stop it. You need to get over here right now.
No.
You need to brush your teeth.
No.
You need to brush your teeth. Please.
No.
I'm going to walk out of here. When you're done brushing your teeth, you can come out. Okay? No, you're going to brush your teeth.
No. No.
Brush your
No.
teeth.
No.
Brush your teeth.
No.
When you're ready, come out.
No.
Brush your teeth. You can brush them.
You can see the escalation occur. And the question, is this a bad mother? No, of course not. This mother is struggling. She's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to do what is right for her daughter. I want you as a group to think about how the previous clip made you feel, and then compare and contrast with how this one would make you feel. What's the mental state of the mother here? How is this mother responding to the behaviour that she sees? Is she calm and in control, or is she behaving emotionally?
Michael, look at me. That's enough, okay? Calm down. Michael. Look at me. Hey. Smile. Okay? That's good.
Now, this mother clearly knew her son, and she knew that his behaviour that she'd witnessed was as a result of his anxiety, but that if he slapped himself several times and he would count how many times he was slapping himself, then this would reassure him and he would stop. If she'd have responded in any other way, then that would have escalated the behaviour. So why synergy? I think we recognise that life for those with behaviours of concern can be traumatic, restricted, and often brutal. The interventions themselves can be often problematic, unethical, or effective, or ineffective, should I say. Individuals, families, and communities are at risk of exclusion and harm. And teachers and other professionals are vulnerable to stress, trauma, and physical harm, as we've seen. And it's our job to try to change this. Importantly, it's our job. So we've seen many scandals over the years of the way that people are treated in institutions and in hospitals, particularly for those with intellectual disabilities or autistic people. And we need to ask the question, why does this keep happening? So the aims of Synergy then are to ensure that we can provide a safe, effective, ethical approach to behaviours of concern, and we can prevent these or address harmful narratives and cultures emerging that cause these previous or not only previous, current issues regarding the care and treatment of people in hospital and other places and schools. We can prevent exclusion, abusive practice, restrictive or punitive practices. We can build and sustain local capacity and expertise, and to reduce stress in vulnerable individuals and those, and importantly, in those who support them. This is an important part of the synergy approach and synergy program. So what we would hope to achieve today would be to look at the way that we think about behaviours of concern, look at how we manage our own behaviour, share experiences and summarise the evaluation of the programme, and to lay the groundwork for the mentor programme, which is the second part. This slide takes us to Greece, to the port of Piraeus, where we began the Synergy programme back in 2014 proper. We did some preparatory work before that. Many of the children who had been excluded from schools we found were immigrants. Many were traumatised as a result of being involved in war. Many were fleeing the terror group ISIS. So these children had high rates of trauma within the schools. At the same time, or about the same time, we were doing some work with a Horizon programme, which is part of a European Union programme, looking at the teacher attitudes for working with children who were at risk. Often we found that the attitudes within the teachers, as a specific project that had been commissioned by the European Union, a willfulness was found in teacher attitudes that children were doing it, were behaving as they were to be deliberately difficult, or doing it on purpose, or to do it to manipulate teachers to get their own way, or that the children were spoiled in some way, that they were just badly behaved, badly disciplined, and more extreme, that they felt that some children were dangerous and were doing these things and deliberately to get teachers the sack, to get them to lose their jobs. We found later, with some work that we were doing with individual schools, that these attitudes, whilst they were expressed within this project, were not typical of Greek teachers. That the teachers that we met in the schools were almost exclusively highly dedicated and professional, but experiencing very high rates of stress as a result of the conditions that they were working in. It would be here that we would invite you to reflect on your own experience of this area and to probably illustrate this through the visual arts, shall we say, by drawing a picture, and then we would discuss what that picture represents to you. So to try to literally paint a picture of this issue of behaviour of concern. I'm going to consider the key points and themes. Albert Ellis talks about the ABC of the emotions. We experience an event, which he calls A. We interpret that event, which he calls B, and then we feel an emotional response in line with that interpretation. And then is determined by our level of response, our stress, and many other factors. Turning to beliefs, mindsets, and behaviour, or the framing effect, Albert Ellis reminds us that people are not disturbed by things, but rather their view of things. But he was not the first to put forward this idea. Again, the philosopher Epictetus: men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about them. So this has now been referred to as the framing effect. So what are the themes of synergy? Firstly, that narratives influence beliefs, frame events, shape cultures, and vice versa. Emotional responses are problematic, but switching the focus from child behaviour to supporter would include teachers and support workers. From child behaviour to supporter behaviour, emotions, beliefs, mindset, and skills will reduce stress, improve effectiveness, confidence, and decision making. So switching our response from the emotional to the rational is actually good for everyone. So, synergy. So looking at the theoretical base, then, if you look at these three main areas which surround a strong ethical foundation, they are psychology, society or sociology, and physiology. We know that there is good evidence from people like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Bandura, Ellis, Rogers, Milgram, Zimbardo, Janis. All of these people have contributed to this body of knowledge around individual and group behaviour. People who have studied society, people like Max Weber, Dilthey, Goffman, Wolfensberger, and the concept of Verstehen, that is deep understanding, making sense of experience, making sense of stigma, understanding the nature of power relationships. And then we saw the work of Donald Pfaff, of Bob Cummings, Andy McDonnell, other authors who are interested in stress, arousal, well-being, and mood. All of these things come together to combine an understanding of how we perceive and respond to behaviours. So there is a very strong underpinning, theoretical underpinning of an approach that we're going to talk about today. Having started in Greece, you would expect there to be a very strong ethical base and to understand the differences between right and wrong, but these to be modified in the light of more recent events to include issues relating to inclusion, social inclusion, participation, and acknowledgement and celebration of things that are different. Now, many of these issues are difficult. They're not easy to understand or comprehend. But they are worth the effort. And I think without a strong ethical underpinning, any approaches can soon run into difficulty. The psychologist Albert Bandura focuses on individual behaviour and the idea of learning theory, of role models and of agency. How do we take decisions? How do we learn from others? And he would suggest that we actually become what we see, that no direct reinforcement is needed for learning, but modelling is very important. For that, he conducted a series of experiments, notably the Bobo doll, where children observed a member of staff, a member of Bandura's staff, playing with the doll, beating the doll up, and generally being horrible to the doll. And those children, when then left to their own devices, did exactly the same thing. They started to beat up the doll. In a separate experiment, Bandura also showed that those staff who modelled good behaviour, that were nice to the doll, that were kind to the doll, children observing those behaviours also copied those behaviours, so that there was this very clear and dramatic link between what we see and what we do. And we see examples of role models all around us, do we not? Constantly reminding us that we do become what we see. Now, there are implications for this for the workplace as well as the family. We become what we see. This can be very influential for narratives and for the development and emergence of culture. We see many examples from day-to-day life. Children copy what adults do, and adults copy what other influential adults do. This can have implications, as I said, for the workplace and the bullying that went on at a very famous institution in the UK, where young, impressionable staff coming to work at this institution were influenced by the role models that they encountered. And those role models were not good role models. They were very bad role models who ill-treated people and not only bullied the patients or the service users, but they were bullying their colleagues into compliance. Many of the young people convicted at the trial, this was the Winterbourne View case, were unconsciously affected by observing the behaviours of others. They thought it was okay to behave as they did. But it's not just the bad things. We do see kindness can be modelled, and kindness can be a very powerful determinant of behaviour. I'm going to show a short film now, and I want you to reflect on the range of emotions that are being shown in this film, and how this young girl and her mother are with each other. Not to come to any conclusions, just to reflect on what you're seeing. You see that by remaining in control of our own emotions, Mum was eventually able to introduce the notion of calmness and didn't escalate the situation just by being calm and in control and having a plan for how she was going to manage the episode in front of her. I'm going to talk a bit about Daniel Kahneman now. Daniel Kahneman, American psychologist who, with his colleague Amos Tversky, did a great deal of work in this area, which has been incredibly influential in the development of the Synergy program. And it was Kahneman who was to introduce us to the idea of thinking fast and slow. That is, there are two main ways of thinking. System one, which was fast and automatic and immediate and reflexive, and system two, which was considered slow, reflective, and a more reliable and robust way of thinking. So system one, automatic. System two, you have to think about it. System one, very much the emotional brain, and system two, the rational brain, and the importance of switching from system one to system two. So if we see the brain depicted in this way of the hare and the tortoise, the hare, the expression hare brain springs to mind, where decisions are not thought through, as opposed to the ponderous tortoise, where things are very much thought through. So system one is fast. It acts on impulse. It's very much an immediate response. System two, on the other hand, is slow, and system two is about making a plan. So system one is the prime response is automatic. For example, 6 times 6 we know is 36 because we practice that in our minds. It's also concerned with the fight or flight response, whereas system two, it takes a great deal of effort to be in system two because it is more reflective and it's more ponderous. In system one, we don't have to think. All the thinking is done for us. It's easy, it's natural, it's confident, but it can be prone to error. And I think it's this proneness to error that can account for a lot of the stress. Whereas in system two, we do have to think. It's difficult. It's not natural. It's strong ownership of decisions, though. Once you come to a decision, you realize that you've come to a considered and a rational decision. But it is slower. There are errors, but those errors tend to be fewer. So in system one, we don't have to think so much. It's very easy. System two, we do have to think. System two is all about reflection. Another way of describing system one is it is the experiencing self. It's where we get to react to fight or flight or freeze, is the response to situations that we might face. High demands lead to stress, so an increase in the stress hormones. It affects our judgment, it affects our behaviour. The narrative shapes the physiological response and vice versa. And the biases that we have and the heuristics that we have are maintained within System 1. It is self-perpetuating. And to repeat the point that System 2 is slower, it's more deliberate, it's the thinking self, it's where we think, is in System 2. So it's slower, deliberate, reasonable, reasoned, pros and cons are weighed up, and develop a plan in System 2. So System 2 is all about planning. System 1 is about reacting. Just in this brief exercise, we would get you to think about being in control and whether you can control yourself in situations, and for you to understand your own triggers, for example, things that you know are going to either stress you or annoy you or worry you, and how you can practice dealing with these in your mind, how you can switch from System 1, the emotional self, to System 2, the rational self, and how can you best manage these. Looking at individual behaviour, Albert Ellis talks about the human cognition and the nature of human cognition, and I mentioned earlier how we get to frame and think about events. The effects of our emotions on our behaviour. What we think about something will determine how we perceive it and how we respond, and our emotional response. As Carl Rogers talks about the therapeutic relationship and the importance of empathy, being able to put yourself in the shoes of another, and the importance too of listening, just knowing how to listen. And this is an important component of the mentor course. The whole process of active listening is very important to understand what is behind the words, not just what is being said, but what is meant by that, or what is not being said. All of this is part of the active listening process. But it's not just about individual behaviour, it's about group behaviour, and it's about culture and understanding culture. And there have been classic experiments over the years which have demonstrated the effects on conformity, compliance, coercion, obedience, roles, behaviour, and on cultures, and the notion of groupthink. How groups, how individuals within a group can take on the characteristics of the wider group, consciously and unconsciously. And there have been notable experiments in all of these areas by Ash, Milgram, Zimbardo, Janus, and we need to understand that the scientific value that these experiments bring to our understanding. We now turn to the concept of Verstehen, which is the old German term, which means literally deep understanding, or to understand things properly, often taken from the position of the other. Do we understand the position of the other person? Do we have a handle, or are we in contact with how that person might be feeling? Often based on lived experience, knowing that often things that we witness are beyond our understanding. We never can understand, never will understand. And this avoids the temptation to move into simplistic or reductionist explanations of behaviour, and helps us to develop empathy. And we know that within this area of work, simplistic or reductionist explanations of behaviour have been criticised for giving rise to ineffective, harmful, unethical approaches, and we need to do much better when it comes to listening to the experience of other people. Knowing why things happen isn't always within our gift. we need to stand back and to reflect. We also need to acknowledge that for many of the people in the services or in the work or in the schools that we come across are in a powerless position or might be stigmatized. And understanding the power imbalances and the nature of stigma is essential to our understanding of exclusion and social exclusion, or how harmful or bad practices are allowed to develop with people who are marginalized or stigmatized. I now turn to the topic of stress and physiological arousal, and there are notable contributors to this field, but it is around the linking of the mind to the body and the connection between the mind and the body, and how internal states, and these are often hidden, can influence behaviour and well-being. Also influential on beliefs, belief systems. Again, the connection back to previous topics of stigma and power imbalances, and that the role of stress and arousal in human behaviour is well documented, particularly around fight or flight or freeze, and how we manage these emotional states so as to reduce stress. We also know that stress is related very much to the emotions, but is also contagious. That is, if you are around people who are highly stressed, you will pick up on that stress, and we've seen that within families, and we've seen it within services and within schools. So a teacher who is highly stressed is unlikely to be effective in teaching children who are traumatized or themselves under a lot of stress. So the key is that we need to look at how do we reduce stress in those individuals, so that the linking of the mind to the body is in our understanding is critical. So talking about this in a bit more detail then, we know we've got system 1, all the things that we were talking about earlier, the sort of emotional self, and system 2, the rational thoughts and actions. How do we go from our emotional to our rational selves? How do we go about this? So recognizing the brain system, I think, is very important. Is it system 1 or is it system 2? Now, we are aware that there are a limited number of basic emotions. We know that the emotional self is very subjective, but it is influenced very much by culture. It's a state that we tend to be born with, but it is modified by our experiences and by the cultures in which we live. We also know that first impressions are powerful and enduring. The work that Vertsky and Kahneman have done on emotional recognition, framing, effect, show that a first impression, whether we're told or whether it's a visual impression, is extremely important to us. And I'm going to show you some pictures, and I want you to think about your own emotional response to each of these. This is the first one. What's your emotional response to this when you see this? Is this a cute kitten, or do you have an aversion to cats? This is an interesting one. The emotional self is probably something that we have been programmed with to. There's something in our brain that tells us that this is a dangerous situation. What about this? This is one which potentially could be dangerous, depending on your experience. So this is one that's influenced very much by culture. And this, or this. What word springs to mind when you see this picture? Again, this is an example of assigning identity through association. We regard all of these people in the same way, as the same, even though one of them is a photograph of the Pope in his earlier times. One of them is a male model. So again, we need to guard against this association effect where we regard people as all being part of the same. This is what they call a heuristic. So, you know, we have a feeling about these people, so we're going to ascribe an identity to them. Language is also very important, and how we frame things, how we describe things, how we talk about things. And language too can be put into System 1 or into System 2. System 1 descriptions tend to be, and I'm guilty of having used some of these myself in reports and about people until I stopped doing it. But we tend to use our own shorthand, don't we? We describe people as complex or aggressive, unpredictable, obsessive, and so on and so forth. These are very much System 1 descriptions, whereas System 2 descriptions are much more careful and much more considered, and probably much more accurate and more helpful, where we're actually describing what we see rather than an anonymous category of behaviour which doesn't really tell you very much about anyone. If you describe somebody as complex, for example, you might be saying, well, I haven't got a clue why they're doing what they're doing. So why don't we say we don't understand yet? Or we could say that they're interesting. Or we could use a whole range of descriptions which are much more accurate and helpful. So I think getting away from System 1 descriptions to System 2 is helpful to everybody. Similarly with impressions, the first impression is an enduring one. We need to recognize that our emotions are driven by what we see and what we experience. And so if we're confronted with someone with this sort of facial expression, then that will drive a whole range of responses in us, as opposed to if our first impression of someone is this, then that again will cause a different emotional response, or the neutral response. So if we're looking at the same person, each expression can generate a response in us. So it's what we do that's important, how we stand back and reflect on this person rather than to rush to judgment. But remember, our first impressions are powerful and enduring, and they might be wrong. We might need to reconsider those. So we get out of System 1 and into System 2, particularly with some of the situations that we're likely to come across. So thinking about this, being in control, and whether we can control ourselves, thinking through what are our triggers. You know, how can we best switch from System 1 into System 2 to manage those things that we know that we're going to find difficult? How do we guard against closed thinking? How do we guard against being misled by these first impressions? Now, I'm going to show you a film, and I want you to think about this when you're looking at it. What are your first impressions of this person? What's your first impressions? What judgments did you make as a result of this? How do you come to these judgments? And What are the lessons here?
The previous part of this video was in my native language. Many people have assumed that when I talk about this being my language, that means that each part of the video must have a particular symbolic message within it, designed for the human mind to interpret. But my language is not about designing words or even visual symbols for people to interpret. It is about being in a constant conversation with every aspect of my environment, reacting physically to all parts of my surroundings. In this part of the video, the water doesn't symbolize anything. I am just interacting with the water as the water interacts with me. Far from being purposeless, the way that I move is an ongoing response to what is around me. Ironically, the way that I move when responding to everything around me is described as being in a world of my own, whereas if I interact with a much more limited set of responses and only react to a much more limited part of my surroundings, people claim that I am opening up to true interaction with the world. They judge my existence, awareness, and personhood on which of a tiny and limited part of the world I appear to be reacting to. The way I naturally think and respond to things looks and feels so different from standard concepts or even visualization that some people do not consider it thought at all, but it is a way of thinking in its own right. However, the thinking of people like me is only taken seriously if we learn your language. no matter how we previously thought or interacted. As you heard, I can sing along to what is around me. It is only when I type something in your language that you refer to me as having communication. I smell things. I listen to things. I feel things. I taste things. I look at things. It is not enough to look and listen and taste and smell and feel. I have to do those to the right things, such as look at books, and fail to do them to the wrong things, or else people doubt that I am a thinking being. And since their definition of thought defines their definition of personhood so ridiculously much, they doubt that I am a real person as well. I would like to honestly know how many people, if you met me on the street, would believe I wrote this. I find it very interesting, by the way, that failure to learn your language is seen as a deficit, but failure to learn my language is seen as so natural that people like me are officially described as mysterious and puzzling, rather than anyone admitting that it is themselves who are confused, not autistic people or other cognitively disabled people who are inherently confusing. We are even viewed as non-communicative if we don't speak the standard language, but other people are not considered non-communicative if they are so oblivious to our own language to believe they don't exist. At the end, I want you to know that this has not been intended as a voyeuristic freak show where you get to look at the bizarre workings of the autistic mind. It is meant as a strong statement on the existence and value of many different kinds of thinking and interaction in a world where how close you can appear to a specific one of them determines whether you are seen as a real person, or an adult, or an intelligent person, and in a world in which those determine whether you have any rights. There are people being tortured, people dying, because they are considered non-persons, because their kind of thought is so unusual as to not be considered thought at all. Only when the many shapes of personhood are recognized will justice and human rights be possible.
I think that film illustrates the dangers of going on first impressions. This woman, Mel Baggs, was described as mentally retarded, non-speaking, autistic, and was viewed very much in that light. And it was only when communication became available to her that she was able to type things in her language, which showed that she really did understand more than had been understood by other people who didn't really have any understanding of how she was and her level of ability. So I think it's an important lesson in not underestimating or misunderstanding people. So continuing in that vein, then we're looking at biases and heuristics, that is, these shortcuts where we make assumptions based on what we see, what we experience, our emotional self. System 1, biases and heuristics are associated with our emotional responding. That is, confirmation, things like confirmation bias, attribution bias, salience bias, things which are noticeable, are much more likely to attract our attention, and we can be misled. System 2 buys us time to be more reflective and to understand these things in more depth, verstehen, with a deeper understanding. And the same goes for risk. Risk is often an exercise in confirmation bias. Predictions, particularly around risk, are an application of bias, and wishful thinking, things will not be too bad, or catastrophizing, that is, things will be awful. Bad choices are very much based on errors associated with biases, these errors of forecasting. Temptation is to either give too much credence or to ignore risk altogether, give too much weight to risk. When an unlikely event becomes the focus of attention, then we tend to amplify or exaggerate that. The risk of terrorism, for example, the likelihood of being on the receiving end of a terrorist attack in London is very, very low. And yet this is a source of great anxiety to so many people who feel they only have to step outside the door to attract a terrorist attack. So again, overestimating or underestimating risk tends to be very common and an application of bias. Our feeling about risk is very prone to error, and this is important in the area of work that we are concerned with to emerge. Something described as the availability heuristic is something that is very easy to imagine. And this is to do with gut feelings, how we feel about something instinctively, or things which spring to mind when we hear a particular expression or someone talking about a particular person in a particular way. Might be influenced by a whole range of things to do with beliefs or politics or religion, or all sorts of things can intrude. But it is very much the product of system one. It is emotional. It might be right, but often it isn't right, and we need to just get into this reflective space and think again. One of the examples that Daniel Kahneman produces, it concerns a young man called Steve, and he's described as an individual by a neighbour as follows. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with very little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure, and a passion for detail. So the question is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? If you consider that for a moment, what's your instinctive response to that question, given the information that you've just been provided with about Steve? What's your response to that? Because it really is based on nothing. There's no right or wrong answer. It could be determined by a whole host of other factors which have nothing to do with the description. For example, if Steve lived in the centre of a city, or whether Steve lives in the middle of a rural community. So we need to be very cautious about how we make use of this information, which reflects our biases and the heuristics, things that we associate with certain types of personality. So what are the practical implications? So we first need to consider those things which are within our control. And those include things like our thoughts, our actions, our beliefs. All these things are within our control. What we do is usually within our control. And then we consider things which are not within our control. And not within our control is pretty much everything else, from the weather to our health, to our reputation, what other people think of it. None of these things are within our control. We can behave in ways which might influence some of these things, but they're not within our control. So what can you control? Your thoughts? Yes, to a degree. Your beliefs? Your actions? All of these things are within our control. We can control these things. Now turning to the concept of Verstehen, which really means the ability to understand things deeply and often taken to mean from the perspective of the other. So there is a dimension of empathy involved in the concept of Verstehen. It's really a way of dismissing reductionist or simplistic explanations of behaviour or what we see in others, and to really consider in more depth what is happening. What are we actually seeing here? Because as H.L. Mencken reminds us, there is an answer to every human problem that is neat, plausible, and wrong. The German sociologist Max Weber was really pursuing the theory of Verstehen as the empathic understanding of human behaviour, and to really understand human behaviour from the position of the other. That is a deep understanding based on an understanding of the lived experience of the other person. Now, lived experience has come to the fore in recent years, in that we are much more likely to listen to people who have lived experience of a particular situation. So it is a more sophisticated and nuanced way of understanding human behaviour, and very much related to System 2. So how do we begin to challenge and change our thinking about behaviour? And I want us to consider for the moment the case of Amir, who described as having periods in the morning where he would cry and suddenly bang his fists on furniture, punch himself in the head very hard. Physical restraint made Amir worse. He would bite and he would headbutt people. This happened every morning at breakfast. So what might be happening? And a discussion took place as to the reasons for Amir's behaviour, why he might be doing as he was doing. Various explanations were put forward based on very simplistic or biased understanding of Amir's experience. He'd lost his brother recently. Was that a factor? There had been some changes in his routine. Were those factors? And then a member of staff who knew him well said, well, Amir was used to having the full fat on the top of the milk on his cereals in the morning. And since changes in the dietary regime at the house, he was no longer able to access the cream off the milk. And she felt that this was very influential because she knew Amir, very influential in Amir's behaviour in the morning. And sure enough, the staff decided to reintroduce the milk so that Amir could have the full fat milk on his cereals in the morning, and Amir's behaviour immediately ceased. The problematic behaviour immediately ceased. So this is an example really of Verstehen, really trying to understand things properly from the perspective of the other person, from Amir's perspective. So our two brains then, our emotional brain, which is instinctive, versus our rational brain, which is our more reflective brain. And Kahneman calls these two systems, System 1 for the emotional brain, the fast thinking brain, and System 2 for the slower, more ponderous reflective brain. And making the point that System 1 is fast, it's automatic, you don't have to think about it, it's impulsive, it's instant, and it's unconsidered. So decisions that are taken in System 1 can often be bad decisions. or at least their non-reflective decisions. Whereas system 2, slower, reflective, sometimes difficult to acquire these skills, can be hesitant, and it is considered, above all, it is considered, and that is reflective. And this switch between system 1 and system 2, if we can do that, it buys us time. It buys us time to reflect, it buys us time to think again, and it buys us time to plan. Now, system 2, the system 1, this is the fast system, associated with high stress and the fight, flight, and freeze phenomenon. It's associated with all of our biases that we bring along with us. We don't consider things in quite the same way. We are more biased. And we also see things like groupthink in system 1, whereas system 2 is slower, lower stress, causes us to pause and reflect, helps us with planning, helps us with self-awareness. System 1 can lead to stress behavior, high levels of arousal, being out of control, unplanned activity, whereas system 2, slower, calm, present, in control of ourselves, managing our biases, importantly, resisting our gut instinct, resisting our gut feelings to do things, say system 1 versus system 2. But it's not all bad news about system 1. System 1 isn't inherently bad. We need system 1. It has some useful purpose, system 1. It can get us out of trouble. We need it. It's useful. It's immediate. It's available to us. And it helps us to frame things which we understand to be dangerous or can be perilous. But there is a downside. It can also lead us, as I say, to bad decisions, impulsivity, poor judgment, anger. These are all products of system 1. Loss of self-control, and of course, high levels of stress. I'm going to illustrate this now with a story about Dan and Joanne. And this story is entitled The Curious Incident of the Bag and the Cliff. Now, Dan and Joanne were having a nice day out on a holiday in the Mediterranean. They parked their car on a deserted beach and walked up a steep path to the top of the high cliff to take photographs. Dan was posing for a photograph when he accidentally kicked the bag over the edge of the cliff into the sea far below. Dan recalled what the bag contained: their passports, their money, their credit cards, their apartment keys. It also contained the keys to the car which was parked below on the beach. The tide was coming in. Joanne was distressed. Dan could see the bag floating in the sea below from high up on the cliff top, and it was starting to sink. Now you've got the scenario in your mind. How was Dan experiencing this? What do you think was going through Dan's mind? What do you think happened? How likely was this to be one of Dan's better decisions? What are the key messages from this? In the event, Dan did decide to jump into the sea to rescue the bag. He failed. Someone from a vantage point on the beach saw what was going on and went to his assistance. And it was then explained that Dan made these decisions because it was impulsive. It was very much a system 1 response. His judgment was clouded. It could have been a fatal mistake that he could have made. But if we see how the irrational brain or the emotional brain at times of great stress, can suddenly take over and cause us to make irrational decisions. And sometimes these decisions can have catastrophic consequences. Whereas system 2, it's conscious, we are in control of ourselves more in system 2. It's rational and it's planned, but it can take time. The skills that are required in system 2 might be quite difficult to achieve, and we need to be self-aware. And self-awareness is one of the things which is most important. It's a skill that we always need to work on, is to be aware of our own presence and the impact of that presence on other people. But with practice, with rehearsal, with constant reinforcement of our own behaviour and being self-aware, these skills are possible to achieve. I'm going to show you a short video now of something called road rage, which is experienced in just about every country in the world. So I think we can all relate to what's happening here. And what I want you to think about is this driver, the driver in the pursuing car, is he in system 1 or is he in system 2? Car comes to a junction. And he's about to pull out, and as he pulls out, you can see there is a car coming up behind him, flashing his lights. What system is he in? Is he in system 1 or is he in system 2, the driver of this car? He's getting out, there's no regard for his own safety. What system is he in? The driver has driven off. You can see where he's parked his car, look, in the middle of the highway. But he's not content to leave it there. He's still in system 1, and here he comes again. His brain is full of chemicals. He's in system 1. He's seething with anger. He's in his emotional brain space. He's not rational. And here he comes again. He's determined to exact revenge for this driver pulling out in front of him. So here he comes again. What system is he in? Is he in system 1, his emotional brain, or system 2, the rational brain? You can see how he's put himself in mortal danger. These are very common issues, are they not? So instead of behaving emotionally, we need to behave rationally, switch from system 1 into system 2. Have a plan for how we're going to behave should this thing that we're seeing here happen to us. And this driver, the driver of the car, being pursued by this bad driver, seems to be in system 2. He seems to have resisted the temptation to retaliate. I'm going to show you a different example now of what we call British road rage. And this motorcyclist is peacefully riding his motorcycle when you will see that he is cut up by a car. He's nearly taken out by this car coming on the wrong side of an island. And I want you to consider how he reacts, and when is he in system 1 and when is he in system 2. Coming up to a junction now. See the car in a minute. Little swear word there. And he's looking around and he wants to immediately pursue this car. He's trying to change direction. Can't do it straight away because there's another car coming. He's looking for this car. Where did this car go? This car. Almost hit him. Where did it go? He's noticed it went into the car park. So he's pursuing this car into the car. What system is he in? So he's very much in system 1. But he's calmed down a little bit now because of the time that's elapsed.
You know what you did, yeah? Yeah, it's alright, don't worry.
So do you know what you did then?
Yeah, it just shook me up a bit because you came right in front of me. I thought you was going to hit me. Yeah, but it's alright, don't worry. Yeah.
Saw him move from being in system 1, which was his emotional brain, into system 2. What happened? Well, you will notice that some time elapsed, and time is very important. Time elapsed between the event, that was almost being hit by the car, and him catching up with the car in the car park. And what happened in the car park, he was still in system 1, but not quite so upset. But in the car park, the gentleman driving the car turned out to be an elderly gentleman, and he was non-confrontational. So rather than escalate the situation, he apologized, and that immediately de-escalated the situation so that the motorcycle rider could come into system 2. And if we could think about how that might apply in our work, how we quite quickly can escalate or de-escalate a situation just through time and responses. So I just want you to think about that and examples where that might apply in the work that you do. So to recap on some of these points then, system 1 is emotional. That's the main focus of what we need to recognize is system 1 and our system 1 responses, which are in essence fight, flight, freeze, or to maintain our comfort zone. That is to reinforce our biases, our established biases and heuristics, that we like to think that we're right about something. So we seek out information that reinforces our view. But remember that making the switch from system 1 to system 2 buys us time. System 2 being rational, our rational selves, that's the main focus of system 2, where we reflect, where we plan, where we develop self-control, and where we can challenge some of our beliefs. And some of those beliefs might be right, but often they're wrong. And we need to reflect on these things and understand them and challenge them. By challenge them, I don't mean that we contradict everything that we believe, but we just reflect on it. Am I really seeing this? Is this really happening? Or could it be that I'm responding to a set of predetermined biases or false beliefs? So to recap then on ABC, remember we experience an event, which is A, we interpret that event as either threatening or hostile or pleasant or whatever, and then we feel an emotional response in line with that interpretation. And then that leads us on to do what we are likely to do. So just worth reflecting for a moment on ABC, our experience, how we interpret it, and how we respond. Now I'm going to try and bring it all together now with this short exercise. And I want you to imagine that you're driving home from work and you're suddenly aware of the fact that the car behind is flashing its lights at you. You're being tailgated. That is, a car is really close behind, flashing his lights now. And then you see the driver, and he's on his mobile phone. He's got a reverse baseball cap on, and he's on his mobile phone. What do you think? What do you think about this person? What system are you in? I would argue that you're probably in system 1, which is fight or flight, and you would want to take some sort of action. What are you thinking based on what you can see? We now need to think about what you can't see, and that is his wife, who he's on the phone to. He's on the telephone to the hospital because you can't see his wife is on the back seat of the car, and she's in labour. She's hemorrhaging, and he wants to get her to the hospital. And the doctor has said, you've got to get her here very quickly, otherwise she's in real danger. So you're in his way. He's trying to get you out of his way. He can't communicate this to you except by flashing his lights. So you need to reflect and get into system 2, because you will never ever know the reason why some people behave as they do. So we need to take a step back from system 1 into system 2. So what are your thoughts about this guy now? The same or different? Because this is an example of how we often frame events and behave in ways which are entirely related to that framing. So we need to switch from system 1 into system 2. And we need to reflect on, could this be Verstehen? Verstehen is hidden behavior, hidden things. We need to develop a deeper understanding as to why things might be happening. Things could be totally beyond our comprehension. But the one thing we can do is to control our behavior, and rather than display aggressive gestures to this guy or feel bad about him, we can simply get out of his way. We could think, well, he must have his reasons for doing this. I will just get out of his way. I will control what I do. Some examples now from the schools in Greece of some of the experiences of, in most parts of the world, we found that the focus, particularly for children and young people who present with behaviours of concern, the focus tends to be on that young person. Nothing wrong with that, but often this can lead to the situation where we don't consider the impact of our own behaviour on this young person. So with the work in Greece, a different approach was taken, in part because of the resources that were available to support young people was pretty stretched, and so they didn't have access to the same level of clinical support as is available in some parts of the world, and so the focus was switched from the young person onto the teacher. And in that, we were very keen to look at a number of areas. The in terms of the narrative that the teachers had experienced, the influences, what influences that they came under, and the levels of stress that those teachers were experiencing at any given time. So picking out these three areas then, and surrounding those areas with a support system in the form of mentoring, was seen to make a significant impact both on teacher behaviour but also on teacher stress and well-being long term. Once we'd done that, we could then turn our attention, or the teacher could turn attention on the young person, looking at the same factors relating to the narrative that was around them, the influences on their way of being, and the stress levels. So we could get the teachers to think about the young people in the same way as they were thinking about themselves. So again, all of these things were picked out for support through a very similar kind of a system where the teacher was looking to change their behaviour rather than to focus on child behaviour. So what does this look like in practice? If we took the individual teacher and gave them a framework for thinking about how they could change and manage their behaviour. If you remember, we started off by saying whose behaviour, whose concern. This is very much about teacher responses, teacher behaviour. And it was helpful for them to think about this in three ways. The first is the level of awareness, being in control of themselves, switching from system 1 to system 2. The second bit is to really stand back and examine all of these things in much more detail, to reflect. And these things, when added together, result in the third part, which is the plan. Have a plan, stick to the plan. Part of that plan is remaining calm and in control. So these are very practical things that teachers can do. An exercise now, I want you to imagine or recall a problematic situation at work. If you could identify the key points, what happened, what you feared might happen, your stress levels, and how you might approach this in the future. And as part of that, if you could think about what is within your control and what is not. What would a plan look like? And if you could practice dealing with this in your mind, rehearsing this plan over and over in your mind, finalize the plan and rehearse the plan again. And just by doing this as a discipline, you will find that over time, you will be able to switch from your emotional brain into your rational brain until, like driving a car, it becomes second nature. Rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. Further example of how this framing came from a family support program, which catered for families where the child presented with behaviours of concern. At the start of a 6-month program, parents were asked to identify all of the issues where they needed some help. And one family only had one, and that was that they were able to attend church as a family. The family worker, the person working with them in Denmark, asked what was preventing this. Their answer, pointing to their child, was him, Eric, and his behaviour. Now, a short summary of what does Eric do said, well, he makes noises, he runs up and down the church. You see, he's autistic and he can't keep still. He spoils it for other people, that is the other churchgoers. And although we love him, and we really want us to be together at church. It's embarrassing for us. And the worker said, so you think that other people in the church disapprove? The parent said, yes, we get these strange looks. And the worker said, and you think those looks are disapproving? And the parent said, yes, of course. The worker said, do you mind if I check this with the priest to see how he feels about this? The parent said, okay, but I'm not sure it will help. The worker subsequently met with the priest. He expressed dismay that the parent should feel this way and said that all were welcome in his church. In fact, he said that if people felt like this, they were not welcome in his church, but that the family most certainly would. And he said that he would raise it with the parents' permission. He would raise the issue with the congregation at the church, which he did. Now, the churchgoers, the congregation, expressed sadness and surprise that these parents felt this way. They wanted the priest to ensure that the family knew that how they were feeling, and that he was very welcome to come to the church, and that they were desperate for the priest to convey their feelings to the family. So the priest shared the news with the family, and they went to church as agreed the next Sunday, and they were greeted warmly. Eric behaved as he usually did, making noises and periodically leaving his seat to run into the aisle of the church. When he did this, the family received reassuring gestures of acceptance and support from the other churchgoers, from the congregation. And following the service, they were further reassured and warmly welcomed. After this, they attended the church regularly. Eric had not changed, but they had. They'd changed the way that they framed Eric's behaviour and what they and how they behaved in the church. So they had achieved their goal of attending the church as a family, but not through changing Eric's behaviour, by changing how they thought about it and how they responded. They had reframed the issue. In an interesting development after this, it was reported that Eric's behaviour had in fact changed. He became more relaxed. He remained in his seat, and they reflected that this might be because they were no longer transmitting their stress to Eric, and the church became more familiar and relaxed for all through familiarity. But in any event, they felt that it didn't matter whether Eric behaved or not, because their goal had been met. And this example from the airline industry, you will all be familiar with, I'm sure. When you get onto a flight, you will be reminded, will you not, of the safety precautions, and that you will be reminded to, in the event of the the aircraft losing pressure, you should put on your own mask before helping others. And I think this is a very good illustration of switching from system 1, which is the emotional brain, into system 2, the rational brain. Because unless you are under control, unless you are able to be in charge of the situation, then it's virtually impossible to help anyone else. So get yourself under control before you move on. Once you've done that, then it's possible to help the other person. So get yourself under control, and then the other person, and you can then help them to maintain a level of control and equilibrium for them. Further example concerned one of the teachers at one of the schools in Attica, Josefina, who recognised that she was very stressed, and in a discussion with her mentor teacher, she developed a plan for how she would work with Costas. Now, Costas was an autistic student prone to what they call meltdowns if things were not going well for him. So rather than have a plan for Costas, which had been tried on multiple occasions and found not to work, she was encouraged by her mentor to develop a plan for herself. And that plan would also include other people working with Costas. And I'm grateful to Dr. Katerina Laskaridis for sharing this. And this is the plan for Josefina, not the plan for Costas. You'll see that it's very clear and very systematic as to how she would manage her behaviour and help staff to manage their behaviour when they were working with Costas. So this is not a plan for Costas. This is a plan for Josefina, the teacher. And I think that this original way of working with children and young people in Greece has a lot to commend it. You know, that it's controlling what you can control, and that is yourself. It's also important that we know how to listen, or we learn how to listen, and that we engage with the experience of the other person in this process. I'm going to show you 3 short videos now, and I want you to think, how might this person be experiencing this situation? And then I want you to think about their existence. What does day-to-day life feel to them? And then finally, I want you to think about how you can apply the lessons of synergy to respond to this. How can you get the people involved to switch from system 1 into system 2? The first video I'm going to show is of a mother of a young man who is autistic, and there have been some complaints made by neighbours about his behaviour. And his mother is going to describe how his behaviour affects her in the house. I want you to think about the things that are within your control and the things which are not. If you are the worker working with this mother and this young man, how would you approach this?
This is where he's put his head through the wall, and this is where he stood and kicked it. He's 6'2" and he weighs 252 pounds. He can go through this house and just wipe everything out probably in 10 minutes. You know, I've had him turn furniture over, well, you see all the windows and stuff, you know, the air conditioner back in the bedroom, he'll sit and punch that till it's in pieces. You know, in other words, if it breaks anymore, it's kind of like it's material, it can be replaced. I don't even let it bother me, but the destruction is just unbelievable. What are you so mad about?
I have to go.
What are you so mad about?
What's behind the wall?
Calm down. Look, you got Santa Claus is coming to town.
Of all the fool things for them to do.
You got Santa Claus is coming to town. Don't do that. Owie. Owie. He's part of the family, and you hate to give up on your child as a lost cause. But I've come to the conclusion now that the best thing would be to place him somewhere where they can control him and they're not going to hurt him. I'm afraid that if I do leave him at home, it'll be like that man that they took to one of those group homes or centers last weekend that got out of control and they tased him and he died of a heart attack. Yeah, you understand what's going through my head, why I'm not opposed to taking him and placing him somewhere, because this can't go on and other people cannot control him like me.
If you ask me, still in serious trouble.
What's the problem, officer?
What's the problem? I'll tell you what the problem is. Driving.
Oh!
Owie! What do you call that thing anyway?
You watch your movie?
Fix them.
Ow!
So if you could think as a group, what would you do in that situation? How would you approach this? And the one thing that is within your control is what you do. And one of the things that you could do is to say to this mother, can we discuss this somewhere else? Can we take the heat out of this situation by having a coffee, or let's go and discuss what is happening, rather than discuss the situation in front of the young man, of which he is probably very aware of what is being discussed. So how can we switch from system 1 into system 2? Another short video now, where I want you to think of the same things. How is this person experiencing this, and how are these people experiencing this situation? What's their existence like? And then what might a plan look like for them?
It is enough. I am not giving you £20.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
You didn't think about that, did you?
Don't even think about it, Marcel. Put this down. It's dangerous.
Marcel.
Exactly.
Marcel. 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 Stop. Dangerous now. Marcel.
Call the police.
Marcel.
You'll see that the young man is wanting to get some money out of his parents, and his parents are standing firm and saying, no, you're not going to have any money. Now, what advice would you give in that situation if you were the worker working with this family? How would you prevent this kind of escalation in the behavior? How would you get them to switch from system 1 into system 2? And finally, I want you to look at this video. And this is a family with an autistic girl on a flight, and they're asked to leave the flight.
An Oregon family traveling with a 15-year-old girl with autism was kicked off a United Airlines flight this week for what the airline calls a disruptive situation. The family calls it an outrage. Here's Carter Evans.
Video from a passenger shows Salt Lake City Airport police removing an autistic teen and her family from a United Airlines flight last Tuesday after the pilot made an emergency landing. The girl's mother, Donna Beagle, was shocked when officers explained why.
He said, well, the captain doesn't feel comfortable flying to Portland with your daughter on his flight.
Beagle says her 15-year-old autistic daughter, Juliet, was hungry, and when she acts up, this is how she expresses frustration.
You sound frustrated? I know her. When she gets over hungry or over thirsty, she really struggles.
Her mother says Juliet is a picky eater, and after asking a flight attendant if she could purchase a hot meal from first class, she was told no.
And I said, well, how about if we wait for her to have a meltdown, and then she's crying and tries to scratch, and then you'll want to help her.
She eventually got the meal and said Juliet calmed down. Then came an announcement from the captain.
We were shocked to hear him say, we're going to make an emergency landing in Salt Lake City. We have a passenger in the back of the plane who has behavior issues.
In a statement, United Airlines said the crew made the best decision for the safety and comfort of all of our customers and elected to divert to Salt Lake City after the situation became disruptive. Passenger Marilyn Headland says it was the right decision.
She wasn't put off the plane because she had autism. She was put off the plane because she was maybe proposing some kind of a threat at 36,000 feet, which, doesn't make anybody feel safe.
But as Juliet and her family were removed from the flight, other passengers seemed surprised.
That's going to be a lawsuit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Donna Beagle says that lawsuit is already in the works. Carter Evans, CBS News, Los Angeles.
So this family are looking to sue the airline, really for their lack of preparation. Now, they knew their daughter was going to be upset and distressed by the food issue. So how could they have done this differently? What would their plan look like? And I think getting the switch from system 1 into system 2, the emotional into the rational brain, might cause them to reflect on what do we need to do in order to prepare for a flight. I think the lawsuit was unsuccessful, but it so easily can get into a situation that can quickly escalate. So how do we help people to switch from System 1 into System 2? So what does the Synergy program look like in practice? And I'm going to share with you the Attica model, which has been working now for almost the last 10 years, where the school will have a teacher mentor in place, and there's a link with the broader Synergy network locally in Greece, and which links to AT-Autism, which is the international network. And this whole program has been evaluated by the University of the Peloponnese, which is an independent university evaluation of the program. So we can leave the discussion for now, but just to summarize the take-home points that we began with, and a reminder that stress causes us to behave emotionally, and we get an emotional response through stress. And emotional responses, as we know, cause bad decisions, and those bad decisions themselves cause stress. And so how do we make this switch from our emotional to our rational selves, our emotional responses to more rational responses? So if we focus on the character, the well-being mindset, and the stress of the worker, and the narrative, these are things which are more likely to be within our control, rather than control the behaviour of people who might find it very difficult to get that control. We need to get ourselves under control first. So we need to know what we can control and what we can't. We need to reflect, that is, as Seneca said, to examine our impressions. And we need to plan. We need to premeditate adversity coolly. That is, we need to be calm. We need to be in control of ourselves. We need to rehearse the plan. So further important take-home points is that we really need to remember that it's up to us. As if we can change the way we think, we can change the story or the narrative. If we change our behaviour, if we can make that switch from System 1 into System 2, if we can learn to listen, we can learn to be reflective, we remain calm, we change our behaviour, then we might change the outcome. And as Henry Ford reminds us, 3 things in life are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. So to recap on what we were hoping to achieve today, is to look at the way we think about behaviours of concern, and to look at the way we manage our own behaviour, share some experiences and summarise the evaluation of Synergy today, which I'm going to do in a minute, and then to lay the groundwork for the second phase of the Synergy programme, that of the mentor programme. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will just go through briefly who is involved with the programme. We are now working with the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, who is evaluating the programme on behalf of the Donaldson Trust, where we're rolling the programme out in Scotland. The Laskaridis Foundation in Greece, who remain our dear partners. NHS England have just purchased the programme to roll out across schools in England. It is a CPD accredited programme. I am associated with the University of Bath and the University of the Peloponnese now, and the Donaldson Trust in Scotland, I say, is our partner rolling this out in Scotland. So to summarise on the evaluation and looking at the results from the team at the university, of the Peloponnese, these results are, say, independent, and the programme has been shown to be effective at what it claims to do, that is to reduce the stress and improve the well-being in the teachers in those school teachers and education professionals in those schools where the programme was launched in Greece. And the results are that there have been a dramatic change. There has been a dramatic change in the number of students excluded from those schools and in the capacity of the schools to cope with and to deal with those areas where there were concerns, both from the Greek government and from those schools. So it has had quite a dramatic impact as a programme. The evaluation continues, and we continue to work closely with our colleagues in Greece on the evaluation of the Synergy programme.